So we're going to move on to another presentation on paving the way in next generation mining and some case studies on digitization for mines. Alex Smith is an account manager with Cisco. He's been an account manager there for 13 years and involved in the IT industry for 32 years. His role at Cisco is to guide mining companies on how technology can help transform existing processes with the goal of saving money and/or increasing productivity.
I'm going to start by a little caveat that, as per the introduction, I'm not an energy expert by any stretch. I'm a technology person, occasional geek, but I've been fortunate to have worked with a number of mining customers and saw how they were able to use technology to their benefit. So what I'm going to cover is just a little bit about digitization. I don't think I need to explain what the term means or anything like that, but we'll start slow and move into mining in particular and what digitization can mean for mining, and a small case study on one mining company's journey that's been a corporate-wide one, so I hope you find that interesting. What role technology plays in digitization, and I'm going to leave you with some thoughts about, I've called it, what could possibly go wrong, and that is what are some of the things, pitfalls that you may want to avoid. So one of the big things about digitization is it does tend to change the rules by which your game, whatever that game is played. And here's some things. I've got two daughters, and in 2005 they were 10 and 12 years old. And these are the kinds of rules that I was teaching my daughters. You know, never get in a stranger's car, don't meet people on the internet, and now we roll forward, transition to a digitization story, which everyone's familiar with. So I thought that was cute, but you know, the message is the rules do tend to change. And one of those rules is if you're not disrupting yourself and your own internal company processes, then you're at risk of eventually being disrupted from outside the company. And again, this is another nice, cute, totally non-mining example on the board. But I'll ask a question. Does anyone think that mining is just, you know, too big and too capital intense for, you know, these examples I'm giving are more consumer related, millions of customers getting on the internet and doing things? Probably doesn't relate to mining, right? Does anyone think mining can't be disrupted by digitization? So I'm going to say something a little bit bold here and suggest that our industry is a laggard compared to others. And there's some good reasons for that, possibly. But again, the risk of not digitizing, and there's, you know, Blockbuster is up there on the list. Again, someone could argue that that's not relevant, but they didn't see the trends that were happening in their industry, and they got disrupted out of existence. So here's an example of, you know, I work a lot with gold customers here locally. So if everyone's familiar with the term all-in sustaining costs, let's say that there's gold companies out there with $800 per ounce all-in sustaining cost, and someone's able to get their AISC down to $600 or maybe even $500. Do you think that that $500 ASIC company is able to do some disruption in the industry? Probably if you're staying up there at the $800 range and someone else is down near $500, your stock price is probably going to go down, and you will probably there become a ripe for the picking for someone to acquire you or acquire your mines and apply those same processes and applications to do the same. So last slide was the kind of negative view of things, but there's a lot of really good things that are happening from, I would probably say, most companies. And a lot of times that's a mine GM who's forward thinking on a particular process in the mine and doing something really great and getting good results from it. And this is good. So I'm going to talk now about Barrick Gold. And they made a decision about 18 months ago. So the journey is still fairly young, but they made a decision not at a mine level or a division level. They made a decision at the corporate, CEO, chairman of the board level, and said, we think this is something we have to do so that we don't get disrupted in the future. And they're in with both feet, both arms, all parts of their body. They've dived into this and they're making significant investments, and I'll talk a little bit about their progress. And a couple of these next slides are actually Barrick slides that I've borrowed. And so they describe their vision being one of a data-driven mine to maximize value and create competitive advantage. So data-driven, that really just means they want to get the right data at the right time to the right, either the person or the machine or the application / process, get the data where it's needed, when it's needed. And decisions shouldn't be made based on, I've got 20 years of experience and my gut feel says we should do this for the next 3 months. Data-driven decisions are based on facts and figures and charts, and not based on gut feel. So they've defined 6 principles, which of course there's going to be a focus on the bottom line. Let's prioritize projects that are let's start with low-hanging fruit, take slow steps, and there's a great thing in here. The next one is take an agile and fast approach. I'm going to dwell on that for a moment. They compare it to, instead of the waterfall approach, and I don't know if those are terms that are familiar. They're kind of borrowed from the IT world. And so an agile approach is when you perhaps don't know exactly how you're going to get to the outcome that you want to get, so you just start making small steps. And there's a term called that you do sprints. And the sprint could be 2 days, 1 week, and you try and make a small step, and then you check your progress, you check the results, you're either on course, you're off course, and you keep going, and you make mistakes. But in the agile approach, there's a term called failing fast. So if you fail, that's okay, but you did it quickly, you learned, and you adjusted course and moved forward. There is one mindset that thinks that agile, by definition, and the name does sound like it might be always the fastest way to do things, but the waterfall approach is, if you really understand, you've got the experience and you know exactly how to get to that business outcome, and you've got it all documented, then starting with that big plan and just driving execution towards the goal line is probably going to be the fastest way to do it. But if you are, let's say you're innovating, you're doing something new that you've never done before, try the agile approach and be accepting of small failures, and you'll probably get to your end goal faster. Oops. So some of the results are quite excellent. I'll start with a couple of things. Teleremote this was underground with vehicles, and production in terms of tonnage literally doubled as a result. There were a bunch of unexpected benefits. Now that they had visibility into those processes, they were able to see things such as which operators potentially needed some training. They noticed maintenance savings, literally, because a remotely operated vehicle was done so without slamming on the brakes and without accelerating too quickly, which could have a fuel implication, by the way. And so they saw a bunch of savings that they weren't even expecting as a result of that. Autonomous vehicles is something they're just moving into now. So note, they didn't jump to autonomous right out of the gate. They said, let's start with teleremote. They've got that under their belt, very good results, and now they're moving to autonomous. Lots of other good things they're doing. I'm not going to touch on them all. Happy to share my knowledge of it as long as it's in sort of public domain, if anyone's got any questions after. So let's talk about the role of technology. And I'm going to dwell for a few moments on the term platform. People are probably familiar with that. It's an IT term, and I'll describe a platform as, when Apple came out with the iPod, that was not the iPod piece of hardware itself, but they developed a platform that was an open ecosystem of partnerships with the people who produce music, etc., how you bought music. It wasn't just a device that played MP3s, because those had existed for quite a few years before Apple came out with the iPod, but because they turned it just from a device into a platform, it changed the way the music industry, and it's never been the same since. So when I talk about technology platforms, these should be platforms that can be used by many, many different uses. Cisco comes from a background of being in the network business, and so it's absolutely critical. If you want to connect to as many things as possible, you better be a big believer in open standards and not being proprietary. Otherwise, you're going to have silos of connectivity. And if our mission is to connect as many things in the world as we could possibly connect to, we fully embrace open standards. And it's, in fact, to a degree that when Cisco innovates and comes out with something, a newfangled feature, we'll take advantage of the market lead that we may have. But the first thing that we do when we've gotten that is we hand it to the standards bodies. So this is our competitive differentiation, and we take it and we hand it and give access to that to our competitors. Think about your own industry that you're in. Does that sound like anything that's going on in the mining industry from the OEM vendors? Cisco 25 years ago our revenue could be measured in a few millions. We're now 40 to 50 billion, 70,000 employees, $40 billion in the bank. We've done pretty well. Open standards allowed us to explode our growth. And there's a perception, I'm on a little bit of a soapbox here, but there's a perception from suppliers to the mining industry that by being proprietary, that's going to help their revenue because you as a customer are locked in. But I'd like to suggest that all of you folks in the room have a great role to play in terms of driving standards in your own industry, so that and push all of the vendors that you're working with to comply with open standards so that your growth can explode as well. Sorry for that soapbox, but it's something I'm quite passionate on. The last point on lowering cost, and it's a little bit of a poke at the same point that I just made. Just because you paint something yellow and call it a mining something or other doesn't mean you should be able to charge 10 times as much for it. Look outside your industry for people are solving the same kinds of problems you have. People are doing preventative maintenance. People are connecting vehicles and pulling data off those vehicles in all kinds of industries. They didn't need to use a specific industry-based solution to do that. And the cost benefits of looking at a cross-industry solution will probably surprise you. This is, again, just making the point of network and connectivity as a platform. And if you do it right and build it scalable and secure, then you have a single platform that's there. You'll probably have to cost justify it on the first application that you need to build that infrastructure around, but then all the rest can ride upon that investment, and it just makes it easier and easier to go from there. So a few different platforms I'll mention, and I'll even call this out, although it's not labeled as such. This is my shameless Cisco advertisement on some of the platforms that we offer. So of course, connectivity, that's what everyone thinks of Cisco for. So again, you build that connectivity platform, whether it's underground, open pit, or in a building, whether it's using wires or any number of different wireless technologies. You build that infrastructure, manage it as a single infrastructure, and secure it, and you can use it for every, and I'll suggest all of your application needs. Collaboration becomes very important. The more that the speed of business moves, the more that humans need to be in great contact with each other to help decision making, and you should be looking at a platform there as well. And by a platform, I mean you shouldn't care if you want to meet with some other company, let's say it's a supplier, and they use Polycom video and Skype for Business on a smartphone. Who cares? And if you want to have a meeting and include someone who happens to be 2,000 feet below ground and they just have a Motorola push-to-talk radio, let them join the meeting as well. They may not be able to have video or whiteboard from that push-to-talk device, but they do have audio, so let them join. Let anyone join from inside or outside your company if they're invited with whatever device or whatever boardroom they happen to be in. Security. Cannot do a presentation like this without mentioning cybersecurity. Shame on me for letting go to this point in the presentation without mentioning it sooner. It's absolutely critical. The more things you connect to, the more you need to be careful about making sure that the right things are happening and the things that you don't want to happen don't. And pretending that because a lot of mines are in very geographically isolated locations, so we must be safe. People are connecting to everything you've got, whether it's with someone's plugging a laptop in because they're a supplier doing maintenance, or an employee who happens to be possibly malicious, but often just naive in terms of some of the risks. You are connecting things, and there are ways that, a ventilation fan or I've seen malware and bad things happen because someone got in through a projector in a meeting room, or someone got in through a video surveillance camera. You need to be looking at this, and it becomes more and more important as you connect more things. But the good news is there are ways to protect yourself. Analytics, data is very, very important when you talk about digitization. I'd like to suggest that ideally you'd want to have analytics as a platform at the very top. Networks at the bottom, and analytics should be at the very top. And ideally, that analytics platform, you're taking data from all kinds of different sources, regardless of the manufacturer of where that sensor or that piece of equipment was made by. and you're bringing all different types of data together in one place so that you can correlate the spot price of your commodity to the weather, to the previous presenter. It's important to correlate a lot of different types of data, not just my Caterpillar data from this type of vehicle. So now, final topic, what could possibly go wrong? I've mentioned technology silos. This is the opposite of a platform. Buying some technology infrastructure that does one purpose. Your application should do that one purpose, but the security, the network, and so on, all the things that support that application should be ideally reusable over and over again. I've mentioned the risks about proprietary, and if you want to make things easy for yourself as the years go on, don't get trapped into a proprietary silo, because your devices are trapped, your equipment is trapped, and most importantly, your data could be trapped as well. Organizational silos. Does anyone recognize that in your own organization? Just there in the technology world, there's engineers doing operational technology and IT looking after what would classically be ERP systems and email and things like that. Those two groups should be hopefully not, I was about to say colliding. Hopefully it's not a collision, hopefully it's a collaboration, because there's things that each side of that equation needs to teach the other side. They are different. I'm not going to try and tell you they're exactly the same, they're not. So each of those groups needs to work with each other and help each other understand how you can help each other. And look everywhere for innovation opportunities. And I'll say this about Barrick Gold. They're very, very open when they went down the digitization path. They are, and again, if you feel that you want to be the best miner in the world, copying what other miners do probably isn't going to be the way to get you there. And they want to be the best, and so they're looking at who's the best at doing, acquiring data from a vehicle. Who's the best at doing preventative maintenance? Could be the airline industry, so why don't we go over and see what we can learn from them? Very healthy thing. And I'll say that innovation doesn't necessarily mean invention. Innovation's great, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do something that's never ever been done in the world. And I think this is a great example. 1972, a brilliant thing that helped millions of people was just putting wheels on suitcases. They didn't have to invent the wheel, they just used it in a nice new way. So again, innovation doesn't have to be invention. Final thing to talk about is a multi-thing here. What to watch out for: religion, politics, and culture. I have to say that I've worked, before I focused totally on the mining industry, I've worked with all kinds of industries. I've never seen, I'll say you should be proud you have such a strong culture, but be careful of the strength of that culture, because there is some negative aspects to it, and it's because of the religion and politics aforementioned. So a really positive culture for digitization is one that definitely is ready to embrace change, and people need to be able to look at the change as positive. And maybe a person's job tasks aren't going to be the same, but the job will probably be enriched. There's been a lot of talk, productivity gets rid of jobs. Hey, that was probably said in the 1950s. I think everyone in this room is employed. The jobs have changed over time. They didn't get replaced by, maybe one person's job got replaced by a robot in a auto manufacturing plant, but those automotive companies still hire tens of thousands of people just the same way they did before they automated. And failure is something that's a difficult one to insert into a culture and make failure something that's acceptable within boundaries. And there's a nice three-legged stool for any technology project that it should, if you want to have success implementing technology, you need to think about people, process, as well as the technology. Cisco likes to call it a four-legged stool. We put culture in there. And so people just means you have a project and you're inserting new technology. People means you should train the people so that they know how to use the technology. Culture is that it's not quite as easy to put your finger on, but it's the most likely thing out of those four-legged stools that could cause the project to fail. And it's when someone says, I don't think this is positive for me personally, that can be turn a project into a complete failure by someone throwing a wrench into it. So be careful, and happy digitization. Thank you very much.